Hello, Holy Apostles. Father Jim Barron here. Thanks for joining me with this fireside chat. We are full on into Lent, and hopefully your Lenten resolutions are going well. But even if they're not, don't be discouraged, because that may be exactly how the Lord wants to fortify us by learning the graces of perseverance and renewing our commitment. So again, within these days and weeks of Lent, whatever we strive to do, whether it's being faithful to our resolutions or just trying to be faithful to our resolutions, every effort made in that direction is good. So keep up the good work. This coming Saturday, March 19th, we celebrate the Solemnity of St. Joseph. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, but this is a nice little oasis celebration in the middle of Lent, like we'll have the following week with the Solemnity of the Annunciation, Archangel Gabriel announcing the birth of Jesus, the Incarnation, the Word made flesh, to the Blessed Virgin. So more on these again at the end. But there's a big issue that I wanted to bring up in this fireside chat, and to bring it to all of our attention. It's been sort of rushed through our Colorado legislation, and it has to do with what's called the Reproductive Health Equity Act. It's a bit of a misnomer, because anytime abortion is in the picture, it's no matter of equity, it's rather a matter of grave injustice, because there's always someone who loses their life when it comes to abortion, and it tramples on the rights of the weakest and most indefensible people, the unborn. And so this name is what the legislation is called, and it's a bit of smoke and mirrors, because it's trying to make it seem like what they're promoting is for the good. Rather, it's trying to enfranchise the bad. But just a little bit of information about this particular act of legislation. It's been introduced very quickly, and it's being pushed through it was voted and approved by the House this last Friday, and it's going before the Colorado Senate this coming week. And both are controlled by majority Democrats, who all have voiced favor for this piece of legislation. The bill has been sponsored by Representative Meg Froelich, Senator Julie Gonzalez, and House Majority Leader Danea Escar. And what they've been trying to create is Colorado effectively as an abortion destination. As other states around the country are restricting abortion and access to it through various pieces of legislation, they're trying to make Colorado a destination for people to come from around the country so that they can have access to abortion here. And again, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors language. There's a lot of disingenuous thought behind this process. One of the representatives who is in opposition to this bill made a very important insight. Last week, all 41 House Democrats in the Colorado government spoke against Putin's bombing of a maternity ward in the Ukraine, and yet almost all of them, 40 of them, voted to support and pass this legislation that would increase access to abortion up to the day of birth. Like, you could actually have somebody on their due date go in and murder that child in their womb. And they thought that this was somehow, this is a fundamental human right to be able to do so. And someone described this as irony. I describe it as hypocrisy. And anybody who is voting in favor of expanding abortion rights should not feel one shred of moral superiority to what Vladimir Putin is doing right now in the Ukraine, let alone to any of the great butchers of history, those who have tried to effectively create a better society at the expense of other people. Whether it's the Jews, whether it's political dissidents, whether it's anybody who seems to stand in your way to what you think is a better future, whether it's an unborn child or a political party or an ethnic group, no human being's life should be subject to the will or the whim of any other human person, especially when it comes to this matter of abortion and the unborn, because they have no voice. And if their own mothers won't speak for them, then somebody has to, and that's what the law is meant to enfranchise, to protect those who are most defenseless and weak. And so this very disingenuous, this very barbaric bill wants to do a number of things, and again, not only move all abortion access up even to the day of birth, but also would limit parental knowledge of their underage daughters going to receive abortions. And this is a really bad idea on a number of different levels. One, because of the reality of statutory rape, where men who are of age have relationships and get an underage girl pregnant. He can pressure her to have an abortion and it go away and nobody know about it, especially her parents. This is also what helps to fuel a lot of human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. Pimps will bring the women who they have enslaved to work for them as prostitutes to Planned Parenthood, for example, and Planned Parenthood won't ask any questions. We've seen video footage of this, where a young woman who is trapped in this lifestyle is being pressured by her pimp to get an abortion, and Planned Parenthood, who's making money, has no pushback. They don't ask any questions. And again, if it's a minor, if it's a young woman who's under the age of 18, not even her parents will be required to know about these kinds of things or give consent. This and a number of other things that are important to know about are things that we really have to push back on. I mean, the reality is in a Democrat-controlled House and Senate, this is most likely going to pass. But we still have hope. We still have the opportunity to pray and also to call. Call the governor, call the representatives, call the senators of Colorado. Sometimes we'll see these email lists that, it's a mass-produced email that you go in and fill in your information and it's sent to them. They can easily ignore that, and they so often do. I've spoken to Capitol Hill staffers before, and they say that they just ignore those emails. Really, you should call. Tie up the phone lines. If you have time and the inclination to do so, just call everybody in that Capitol building. Let them know that you oppose this. And if you want a script, use what's written on the Colorado Catholic Conference Bishop's website. There's a well-worded email that you can just read as your script, but call, keep calling, call again. And that's really what gets their attention. So, we don't know what the Senate is going to do or when they're going to vote on it this week. It's been ramrodded through. Most people don't know about it. And this is really in reaction to the possibility that the Supreme Court might overturn Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And this is something that as Catholics, we have a fairly clear head about, meaning that we recognize that this is a grave civil injustice, let alone a grave moral injustice. That in no law should it be enfranchised where one person can legally decide on the death of another person, especially an innocent human being like a child, like a baby. Another consequence of this so-called Equity Act, this Reproductive Health Equity Act, would be that under Colorado law, no fetus, no embryo, no child in the womb at any stage of gestation would be given legal recognition. And so if a mother who was expecting her child was murdered and that also resulted in the death of the child in her, then the murderer would only be charged with one death. That child would not be considered a human person and thus would have consequences in situations like that. And if you remember a couple years ago, this was exactly one of the situations that there was a mom who was killed and her baby died with her, and abortion advocates really pushed back on giving recognition to that child because they recognized that this was a step in the direction of understanding the personhood and the legal protection due to persons under the law of the unborn, and they didn't want that. So this is a big issue. Become informed about it. You can make phone calls. We certainly need to pray. And that last step is especially something I want to invite the whole parish to, as we as Holy Apostles will be praying in front of Planned Parenthood up on Centennial and Fillmore this coming Saturday, March 19th, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. We'll pray the Rosary, we'll pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, especially in intercession for, if this bill hasn't been voted in by then, for the defeat of this bill, but also for the people who work there, the people who feel they have no other option than to choose abortion, that they might know that they have many options, and that also Catholics and other people of goodwill will seek to make those options more robust and available so that this doesn't even become something that somebody thinks that they can do or thinks that they need to do, that they recognize the goodness of that child, their right to life, and that they take advantage of the opportunities to help bring that child to full term, give birth, and if needs be, adopt, seek adoption for that child, or some other way to help support those mothers who deep down really don't necessarily want to eliminate their child. So many post-abortive women had said that in that circumstance, they felt they had no other option because they had so many people in their life telling them that they would be there to support them if they got an abortion, but so few people telling that they would be there to support them if they carried the child to term and gave birth. That's wrong. And we have a responsibility to help young women in that situation, or any women of any age, recognize that they always have that choice to choose life. That is the choice. That is really the only choice, and that they will be supported every step of the way. A culture of life is built on not just words, but also actions. And that's what we have a responsibility, in addition to our words and actions, to make sure is a part of our effort as the Catholic Church. we're doing it. There's some great things happening, and we need to expand that, especially given the likelihood that this horrific bill will be passed. We pray for the conversion of those who are promoting it, and we, again, really need to make our voices heard. Call the folks, call those 41 Democrats who are intent on making this a human right or a fundamental human right in our state, and let them know that this is not. It's a violation of a fundamental human right, the most fundamental human right, which is the right to life. Heavy topic, I know, but this is something you all need to be aware of, and we want to pray especially on the Feast of St. Joseph, March 19th, when we'll be in front of Planned Parenthood, for his intercession to help against all odds the preservation of life of these unborn children. If you think about his role in guarding Mary and the unborn Christ child, his role in guarding Mary and the born Christ child as they fled into Egypt, St. Joseph is a strong intercessor for the family and for the unborn, and so we'll invoke his patronage this coming Saturday at our Holy Apostles prayer time at Planned Parenthood from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. If you can only come for 10, 15 minutes, great. Please come for as long as you want, as long as you are able to. Please be aware also, we might get honked at, we might get sworn at, sometimes we might get things thrown at us, but we're doing it for the unborn. And remember what Jesus said, whatever you did for the least of these, my brethren, you did for me. And so we are truly advocating for the unborn and also standing up for the goodness of those who are otherwise voiceless and defenseless. Thank you in advance to those who are going to be there. Thank you to those who have been praying so often unrecognized hours in front of that Planned Parenthood. That's right in our own backyard. And that is sort of a modern-day Auschwitz, a modern-day Birkenau, a modern-day Gulag. This is a horrific thing that, God willing, generations from now, we can look back and say, what were we thinking? This is not a part of our lives. This is something that was relegated to the dustbin of history, like the concentration camps, like the gulags. Someday, God willing, people will be perhaps visiting the ruins of unused abortion clinics and saying, what were they thinking? How could humanity have ever let this happen? We must never allow this to happen again. So a big topic, very heavy, but please continue to pray for the right to life and especially for those who are on the fence, who have confused ideas about somehow this being a necessary thing. There are many Catholics and some in political office who think that this is a human right. It's not. This is a great contradiction in our legal structure as well as a grave moral offense. And both are hopefully going to be well considered by our Supreme Court. Pray for them, pray for their courage, for their protection, and that they might do the right thing when it comes time to consider overturning Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. All right, now a big shift in gears from sort of moral things to the life of our liturgy. Most recently, you've noticed that we've re-begun the sign of peace. This is an option in the Mass. It's something that we're not required to do, but it's something that we've decided to reintroduce for a number of important reasons. I've decided to reintroduce this for a number of important reasons. But first, I guess I want to say that having reintroduced it, I've heard from a number of folks that really don't like it. In some ways, they kind of despise the sign of peace, not because of what the sign of peace is in and of itself, but usually how it's done. And I can sympathize with them. How the sign of peace oftentimes is done in your average parish is sort of the Eucharistic prayer goes through, and all of a sudden it seems like we have a break in the action. All right, now let us offer each other the sign of peace. And it's like people are running for mayor. They're going to shake everybody's hand that they can. It's a sort of a big free-for-all. It's almost like it's understood to be a break in the liturgical action, but it's not. The sign of peace is meant to be a movement or an expression of the presence of Christ who gives us his peace. Having that peace authentically, truly in ourselves, we intentionally pass that on to another. How do we do that? The Mass is a ritual, and just like in rituals, we behave differently. We do gestures. We carry ourselves in a different way during that time of ritual. And when it comes to the sign of peace, that's not a break in the ritual, but is itself meant to be a ritual gesture. How do you ritualistically, if you will, exchange the sign of peace? Different parts of the world have more well-ingrained customs of how you do this. And I'd like to offer us a few suggestions that we might be able to learn from and perhaps adopt. Now, the sign of peace doesn't require touching people. You could, in fact, just keep your hands folded and do a simple bow with an intentional glance towards your neighbor in that sign of that gesture of, I'm giving you peace. As somebody does that to us, we can bow in reception of that peace that they give to us. But again, underneath it is the giving and a receiving of peace, not just a mutual exchange of physical gestures. Perhaps it may be a handshake, but it should be a very intentional handshake, and it shouldn't be with everybody in the church. Perhaps just to the people to your left and to your right, maybe right in front of you, but to do that in a fairly solemn way. There is a solemn way to exercise the sign of peace that isn't sort of a morose way. I think sometimes people confuse solemnity with being down or dour, and that's an unfortunate misunderstanding. To be solemn is actually the proper posture in the Mass because it is a very, very solemn action. Solemnity is not a contradiction to joy. You can actually have real joy and express it in a solemn way. Oftentimes, solemnity helps to protect our joy because it's not just a feeling or an affect experience. It's a real deep down welcoming the gift of the Holy Spirit and allowing that gift to abide in us. And certainly it's expressed, but joy isn't always expressed in a giddy way. You can be having a fairly rough day and still have deep joy. And again, solemnity helps to bridge that gap. And so when we exchange that sign of peace, we can communicate the real joy of the peace of Christ in a very sort of intentional way, which has that solemn feel to it, which has that kind of guided, controlled feel to it. It's not, again, a sort of a free-for-all break in the action, let's high five. It's not the seventh inning stretch. It really is that extension of what has been going on with the liturgy of the Eucharist. The priest expresses those words about Jesus who said, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you." And then that exchange of peace, which the priest first offers, the peace of the Lord be with you always and with your spirit. Now let us offer each other the sign of peace. We don't break out. We rather move into that action with, again, solemnity, intentionality, and we may bow, we may shake hands, we may embrace. There's a beautiful tradition that you see, especially amongst Benedictines and some Eastern Catholics, where they will actually grab the upper arms of the other and bow to the left and then to the right. This is an acceptable gesture. Sometimes you'll see in the Syro-Malabar tradition, the priest go to the deacon with his hands clasped and then, or hands folded in prayer, the deacon going up and sliding his hands alongside the hands of the priest, receiving that peace, and then turning to his neighbor, who then receives that peace from him. It's perhaps a gesture that might make most of us uncomfortable, but it gets the point across. Think of like the Easter candle at the Easter Vigil. It's the light, the only light that comes into the church, and then one person lights their light from that, and then the next, and then it spreads throughout the church. That's the image we should have in mind when it comes to the sign of peace. The priest giving the peace of Christ, and then that peace being received, and then extended to another. You'll notice I've also asked the deacons to kind of slow it down to about half speed when they announce that. Let us offer each other the sign of peace. Because sometimes we can get carried away and start to move before the direction is given. It's kind of like in school when kids would pack up their bags before the bell rings. We don't want to do that. Don't be ready to leave class before the class is actually over. We don't exchange the sign of peace before that peace has been given and the direction offered. Now let us offer each other the sign of peace. So this is something that hopefully we can work on as we reintroduce that sign of peace. And I know not everybody that comes to Mass on Sundays watches these fireside chats, but if you're watching this, please help me out and help the parish out by trying to exercise this more restrained, more solemn, more intentional gesture of peace through any one of those different ways, either a simple bow towards your neighbor, or perhaps if you do shake their hand in a restrained way, a solemn way. But when you say peace be with you, we say it like we mean it, and we should mean it. And when somebody says it to us, we can say amen, perhaps as a way of expressing that we receive that peace that they give to us. But it really does mean something. It shouldn't just be a break in the action. It shouldn't be a distraction, because that's, again, why some people really don't like it. We have this beautiful, prayerful build-up, and then all of a sudden it's broken by this free-for-all with the sign of peace. It should help express that reception of what has been given, preparing us for what we will receive. It shouldn't be a break in the action, but a continuity from one to the next. And it really does matter how we do that. So if you're watching this, I ask your help to please offer this with that intentionality, with that sobriety, with that solemnity, with a real sense of restraint, not just for those who really have a hard time with this moment, this liturgical action, but also for all of us, that we can be ready to receive the Eucharist, not having broken that recollection that we were building, but rather maintaining it and leading into that communion that we will be preparing for in a few minutes after that sign of peace. There's one other liturgical moment that has gotten a gesture introduced into it that, quite honestly, really shouldn't be there. And I've addressed this a few times, but it's time to sort of address it again and ask your help to sort of reduce this. You know, we have prescribed liturgical gestures, ritual actions that the Church wants us to accomplish throughout the Mass. Sometimes we'll sort of introduce our own, and the Church really doesn't intend for those because they can be a distraction from what's taking place. They can also miscommunicate what's going on. One of those is, holding hands during the Our Father. That's not the intention or the intended gesture for the Our Father. Whether it's holding our hands in prayer, or some folks will have different gestures and postures, but it's meant to help not to be a distraction, but help to lead us into that action. But the particular gesture that I have in mind that I'm going to ask us to really discontinue if we're doing it. If we're doing it, it's not, you're not a bad person if you've done it. It's usually out of seeing what other people have done. And that's why I'm asking you to help discontinue it. So fewer and fewer people doing it, people will stop doing it altogether. And that's the extension of hands at the end of Mass. When the priest gives the pyx to the extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, they are going sent out by the priest personally, who can't go and visit all of the homebound. And so he's sending these individuals on his behalf. It's not a communal action. It's not the activity of the community sending these people. It's the priest in particular, because it's my responsibility, my pastoral duty, and I'm not able to fulfill that adequately by myself. And so these folks are helping me. And so it really is not a good thing for the community to be extending their hands as if they were sending the extraordinary ministers. It's also a very confusing looking gesture. One of our parishioners, you probably know who it is, she was a little girl under Nazi Germany, and she can't do this gesture because she did that for years as a child, and it connotes something that people aren't intending it to, but that's kind of what it looks like. And so for people who are coming into our parish and at the end of Mass, they see people doing this gesture with their hands, that's not a good image. They don't understand what that means, and really it's communicating something that shouldn't be communicated. Again, I just want to simply ask that we discontinue that altogether. I've addressed this in Mass at different times, and it's been kept up, unfortunately, by folks. Hopefully this will be a way to explain it more, unpack it a little bit more, but then also to consider it. And please remember this the next time you're at Mass. It's likely that I'll address this at Mass sometime in the future, but I really don't like sort of offering these behavioral tweaks and the input on what we should do and what we shouldn't do. I know Mass is the time where the most people are there, and a lot more people are at Mass than watch these firesides. But if we build up a little critical mass, then eventually these habits will start to die off. They'll become less and less common and hopefully absent altogether. So just some things for your consideration. I ask your help in this area to please discontinue that particular action. As we pray for those homebound. Let's not let the physical gesture distract from what we should be doing spiritually, especially uniting our prayers to those suffering members of our community who are absent. We long for their return. We ask the Lord to ease their burdens and their sufferings, but we also ask Him to give them the courage and the grace to carry those crosses that He has entrusted to them, because we are direct beneficiaries of their sufferings. When they bear their crosses for the sake of the Church, we benefit from that. And so we want to pray for them in a very particular and intentional way. So, closing that note. Again, this coming Saturday is the solemnity of St. Joseph, husband of Mary. And like solemnities, they begin the evening before. And while there isn't a very clear, definitive statement on this, general consensus among canon lawyers is if you do something to celebrate the solemnity of St. Joseph beginning Friday evening, then that would seem to take precedent over the Friday obligation to abstain from meat. And so, it has been well argued that if somebody is again participating in, for example, evening prayer 1 of the Solemnity of St. Joseph, if you have the opportunity to go to the Vigil Mass for the Solemnity of St. Joseph on Friday night, then that begins the solemnity, the celebration of the solemnity. Therefore, that again takes precedence over the Friday commitment to abstain from meat. And so were somebody to do one of those things and then go out to get a juicy hamburger, that would not be in violation of the Friday abstinence from meat, but rather a celebration for the Solemnity of St. Joseph, which is Saturday, but begins with the celebration the night before on Friday evening. So putting that out there. Next Friday, the 25th, there's no question. It's the Solemnity of the Annunciation, which does take precedent over that Friday obligation to abstain from meat. And so to celebrate that solemnity, you can have bacon for breakfast, a burger for lunch, and a nice rack of ribs for dinner, or any combination thereof. And that would be a fitting way to celebrate that solemnity too. As you've heard me say, as Catholics, when we fast, we fast. When we feast, we feast. And solemnities are the highest of feast days. And we do take them very seriously, and we do celebrate the good things, the blessings God has done for us on those solemnities in those particular celebrations. So hopefully that's a little bit of good news. Nice little way to anticipate the great celebrations we've got coming up in the next 2 weeks. As always, thank you for your prayerful support. Thank you for tuning in. Hit the subscribe and the like buttons, and feel free to pass this along to your friends. Thanks so much for joining me with this Fireside. God bless your week.